What you are about to hear has taken marine biologists by genuine surprise. For almost a decade, a team of researchers working off the coasts of Alaska, Dominica, and French Polynesia has been recording the vocalizations of sperm whales and humpback whales, feeding the audio into machine learning models trained to identify repeating structures. The results, still being analyzed and peer-reviewed, appear to suggest that whale songs contain patterns that correspond to specific real-world events: storms, ship strikes, changes in sea temperature, and in some cases, events that occurred before any of the currently singing whales were born. The working hypothesis, floated cautiously in the latest round of papers, is that these animals may be doing something no one previously thought non-human species were capable of. They may be transmitting history. This is a bold claim. It needs to be examined with care. Let's work through it. Whales have been singing for as long as humans have known how to listen to them, and for millions of years before that. The oldest systematic recordings of whale vocalizations date to the 1950s, when the United States Navy began deploying underwater hydrophones to track Soviet submarines. Buried in the data was another signal the engineers did not initially care about: low, resonant, elaborate musical phrases coming from animals the engineers had to ask oceanographers to identify. By the late 1960s, a biologist named Roger Payne had begun studying these sounds in earnest. His 1970 album, Songs of the Humpback Whale, introduced the world to a species whose acoustic behavior was far more complex than anyone had guessed. Payne and his collaborators discovered that humpback whales sing in organized, repeating structures. A song consists of units. Units combine into phrases. Phrases repeat to form themes. Themes arrange themselves into full songs, which can last 30 minutes or more. Whales in the same ocean basin sing the same song. That song evolves over time, slowly at first, then sometimes in dramatic shifts that spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. The original hydrophone network, called SOSUS, was designed to listen for submarines. It blanketed the oceans with sensitive underwater microphones and streamed the data back to Navy analysts. Declassified in the early 1990s, parts of that network were opened to scientific research, and for the first time, biologists had access to decades of continuous acoustic recordings from all over the world. What emerged from those archives was not a simple catalog of whale sounds. It was a picture of a coordinated acoustic culture operating on a planetary scale, with songs propagating through ocean basins in patterns that looked, to the researchers studying them, unmistakably like the spread of fashion or information through a human community. It was already remarkable. It was already the kind of thing that made researchers wonder whether we were listening to communication, to music, or to something that did not quite fit either category. What has happened more recently is that the tools for analyzing the sound have finally caught up with the complexity of the signal. The most ambitious of these efforts is called Project CETI, short for the Cetacean Translation Initiative. Launched in 2020 and headquartered at a research base on the Caribbean island of Dominica, Project SETI brings together linguists, cryptographers, marine biologists, and artificial intelligence specialists from institutions including Harvard, MIT, and the City University of New York. Their focus is sperm whales. And sperm whales, unlike humpbacks, do not sing in long musical phrases. They produce rapid sequences of clicks, called codas, that resemble a Morse code-like pattern and can be exchanged between individuals in what looks very much like conversation. In a landmark 2024 paper published in Nature Communications, the CETI team reported that sperm whale codas have far more structure than previously recognized. Using deep learning models trained on more than 9,000 recordings from a single extended family of whales, researchers identified what they called a sperm whale phonetic alphabet. They found that codas vary in tempo, rhythm, ornamentation, and a property they called rubato, small deliberate variations in timing that shift meaning in subtle ways. The combination of these features produces a combinatorial system with at least 150 distinct usable units. That is more than many human phoneme inventories. To put that in perspective, English uses roughly 44 phonemes. Mandarin uses around 25 consonant and vowel combinations plus 4 tones. What the SETI team appeared to have found in sperm whale codas was a system with a larger basic inventory than either. That does not, by itself, mean the whales are using language in any human sense. It means the raw building blocks for something language-like are present. Whether those building blocks are combined into sentences, stories, or anything resembling grammar remains under active investigation. On its own, that finding would already have been a major result. What came next was stranger. As the models continued to process the data, they began to flag patterns in the codas that correlated with specific events. Shifts in coda frequency and structure appeared in the days before tropical storms, before these whales had any visual or surface indication of weather changes. Changes in coda patterns were observed in the aftermath of boat strikes on known members of the group. And in certain long sequence analyses, the models identified coda structures that repeated across multiple generations of whales, passed down from older females to younger ones, that appeared to reference encounters that had occurred decades earlier. The storm correlation is particularly interesting. Sperm whales can detect changes in atmospheric pressure through sensory systems that are not fully understood, possibly involving a combination of hearing, pressure reception through their bodies, and changes in the acoustic environment of the ocean itself. What the AI models appeared to flag was not a simple alarm call in the presence of bad weather. It was a structured shift in coda use that preceded measurable weather changes by hours or days. Whether the whales were communicating about the coming storm to one another, or simply responding vocally to an environmental shift we cannot yet measure, is still being investigated. Either answer is scientifically significant. Similar patterns have emerged in parallel work on humpback whales, particularly from the Pacific Whale Foundation and researchers at the University of Hawaii. Humpbacks do not use click-based communication, but the song structure they do. Use has been shown to carry information about migration timing, calving conditions, and population movements that individual whales could not possibly know from direct experience alone. One particularly striking study, published in 2022 by researchers tracking humpback populations between Eastern Australia and French Polynesia, documented a cultural transmission event in which a new song pattern emerged in the Australian population, and then, over 3 successive breeding seasons, replaced the existing song in the New Caledonian, Tongan, and Cook Islands populations in sequence. The authors described it as the largest documented cultural transmission event in any non-human species. Something about the new song was being actively preferred, learned, and passed along through a process that mimicked the spread of songs through human popular music far more than it mimicked any simple instinctive vocalization. Taken together, the emerging picture is that these animals may be doing something that looks, functionally, like oral history. Information about past events, encoded in acoustic patterns, transmitted across generations, updated when new events warranted. This is where the conditional language matters. The researchers themselves are careful. They do not claim the whales are telling stories. They do not claim translation. What they claim, cautiously, is that the acoustic structures appear to carry more information than simple social or reproductive signaling would require, and that some of that information appears to be event-linked and long duration. Not everyone in the field is sold. Dr. Luke Rendell, a marine biologist at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, who has studied sperm whale communication for over 2 decades, has urged restraint on the most dramatic interpretations. His concern is twofold. First, correlation between coda patterns and external events is statistical, not proof of intentional reference. A pattern that repeats after boat strikes might reflect a stress response rather than a description of the event. Second, the idea of whales transmitting historical knowledge across generations raises questions about memory, representation, and intention that the data do not yet resolve. Rendell has been clear that he finds the work important and worth pursuing. He simply does not think the existing evidence justifies the leap from structure to history. His critique is fair. The jump from patterned sound to narrative meaning is exactly the place where overclaiming can ruin an otherwise serious line of research. And yet, there is something about the persistence of the patterns that researchers keep coming back to. Consider one specific example. In the waters off the island of Dominica, there is a clan of sperm whales that has been studied continuously since 2005. The matriarchs of this clan are old, some of them estimated to be more than 60 years of age. Sperm whales are known for their strong matrilineal social structures, with adult females teaching their daughters and granddaughters. In the coda sequences of this particular clan, researchers have identified a recurring pattern that appears with higher frequency in the presence of large commercial vessels. That pattern also appears less frequently, but consistently, in the interactions between older females and juveniles who have never encountered such a vessel directly. It is as if the older animals are transmitting something through repeated acoustic contact that the younger ones then carry forward even in the absence of first-hand experience. The simplest explanation is behavioral learning, a process well documented in many species. The more provocative explanation is something closer to what we mean by cultural memory. The truth may lie somewhere between, in a zone for which we do not yet have an adequate vocabulary. Scientists studying cetacean cognition have been careful about terminology. Words like memory, history, and language carry enormous conceptual weight, much of it rooted in human experience. Applying them to whales without modification risks projecting our own categories onto animals whose minds may work differently. And yet, avoiding those words entirely risks the opposite mistake of dismissing something that resembles human cognition precisely because it is not human. The honest position, held by most working researchers, is that we are describing behavior that looks historical in function without committing to the claim that it is historical in the way a written human chronicle would be. The whales appear to be doing something with information across time. What exactly they are doing is what further work will have to clarify. A similar dynamic has been observed in humpback whale populations. Researchers tracking song evolution across the South Pacific have documented what they call song revolutions, where an entirely new song pattern enters one population and spreads to another, thousands of kilometers away, over the course of a few breeding seasons. In at least 2 documented cases, the arrival of a new song preceded measurable shifts in migration routing. The whales appeared to be updating their collective behavior in response to information that was traveling faster than any single whale could carry it. Whether that information includes anything about past events as opposed to current conditions is exactly what the AI analyzers are now trying to disentangle. On a practical level, if any of this holds up under further scrutiny, the implications are substantial. It would mean that non-human animals possess a form of historical consciousness that science has systematically underestimated. It would mean that populations hunted to near extinction in the 19th and 20th centuries may carry, in their acoustic traditions, the trauma of those encounters in ways that continue to shape behavior today. It would mean that conservation efforts need to consider not only the physical survival of whale populations, but the continuity of their informational traditions. That last point is not hypothetical. Whale populations that have been fragmented through hunting or habitat disruption often show reduced vocal complexity compared to intact populations. When older matriarchs die without successors, certain codas and songs appear to be lost from a population entirely. Researchers studying this phenomenon have begun to describe what they call acoustic extinction, in which an animal population survives biologically, but loses the specific cultural content it once carried. From the outside, the species looks intact. From the inside, something has been irretrievably lost. If whales do transmit long-duration information, this kind of loss has consequences that go beyond biodiversity in the traditional sense. It is the silencing of a voice that took generations to develop. On a scientific level, it would require a fundamental rethinking of what we mean by communication in other species. For decades, the conservative position in animal cognition has been that non-human species communicate about immediate circumstances, danger, food, mates, territory, and not about past or hypothetical events. If whale codas are in fact referencing events that occurred decades ago, that line has to move. Precedents exist, though narrower ones. Honeybees communicate about food sources they have found hours earlier, using their waggle dance to encode distance and direction. Alarm calls in some monkey species have been shown to reference specific predator types, but the time horizons involved are short, usually minutes to days. Extending that window to years or generations, as the whale data may eventually require us to do, would represent a substantial shift in how we characterize animal minds. It would also raise the question of which other species, previously dismissed as limited to here-and-now communication, might be doing something similar and have simply not been studied with the right tools. On a philosophical level, it pushes at assumptions most of us do not even know we hold. We tend to treat the deep past as silent. Events happen, and they pass, and the only record of them is what humans write down or build. The idea that there are other record keepers out in the world, working in frequencies and acoustic dimensions we have only recently begun to listen to, suggests that the history of the planet may be being preserved in ways we never considered. Whales that survived the industrial whaling era of the early 20th century may still be alive today. Those animals carry, in their neural circuitry and in the codas they teach to their young, something from a world we no longer see. Bowhead whales, for example, are now understood to live for over 200 years. Specimens have been documented carrying embedded harpoon fragments dating from 19th century whaling expeditions, which means the same individual animal that once dodged a Yankee whale in the 1860s may still be swimming in the Arctic today. If those individuals are transmitting information through their acoustic traditions, they are carrying cultural material from a world before electrification, before the internal combustion engine, before the First World War. Whatever is in their songs began forming during the Age of Sail. The possibility that some of that material is still there, still being sung, is not a metaphor. It is a demographic fact of cetacean biology. What the SI tools are doing is less about decoding and more about pattern exposure. The models are finding structure. Interpretation is still largely human. The researchers at Project SETI and elsewhere have been unusually careful about distinguishing between the statistical claim that coda structures encode more information than previously recognized and the interpretive claim that they are transmitting history. One is reasonably well supported. The other is a hypothesis that will require years of further work to confirm or reject, which leaves us for now in an uncertain but genuinely fascinating position. Somewhere in the deep ocean tonight, a matriarch sperm whale is clicking to her daughter in a pattern that her own grandmother taught her 50 years ago. Whether that pattern is a fragment of something as rich as a story, or simply a reliable acoustic habit reinforced across generations, is a question the data has not yet fully answered. The practical tools for answering it are improving. New generation hydrophone arrays, deployed in dense grids around key sperm whale habitats, can now localize individual vocalizations with precision and match specific codas to specific whales. Algorithms can track a single animal's contribution to group exchanges over days or weeks at a time. Recurrent neural networks, trained on these extended recordings, have begun to show signs of predicting which coda an individual whale is likely to produce next based on the recent history of the conversation. That kind of predictive structure is exactly the signature one would expect. If codas carry real information rather than being random signaling, if this has shifted your sense of what the ocean contains, that is a reasonable response. The research is still unfolding. Papers are still in review. New recordings are still being made. For the first time in human history, we have the tools to listen at depth to a population of intelligent animals that has been speaking for longer than we have had written language. Whatever they are saying, we are finally close to being able to tell the difference between sound and signal. And if signal turns out to include history, it will change not only how we understand them, but how we understand ourselves as one voice among several on a very talkative planet. Over the next decade, as the AI models improve and the acoustic archives grow, we may begin to hear this in finer detail. Patterns may be linked to specific historical events with increasing confidence. Coda structures may be matched to specific social roles within whale communities. The line between acoustic behavior and something we might reasonably call communication, even narrative, may become clearer, or it may dissolve into a more careful and less familiar vocabulary. Whatever happens, the research is forcing a reconsideration of a question humans have been asking for as long as we have looked at the ocean. Is anyone else out there thinking about the world the way we do, with memory and meaning and a sense of time? The working answer, until recently, was no. The newer answer, increasingly, is probably yes, at least in ways we are only just beginning to recognize. The ocean, it turns out, may never have been as silent as we thought.